Welcome back to our channel, everyone. Today is a beautiful, crisp day to dive deep into the streets of Port Charles. Grab your favorite cup of coffee, settle into your coziest chair, and let's talk about the incredible drama unfolding on our screens right now. We have so much to unpack regarding our favorite mob boss and his inner circle, so let's jump right in. I feel so incredibly electrified by that recent moment at the apartment over Charlie's pub, where Sonny Corinthos takes a massive risk with acting district attorney Justine Turner. When she playfully teases, that almost sounded like an open invitation, and they lean in for that passionate daytime kiss. I got absolute chills. I think the writer's choice to have them meet in the bright, revealing daylight rather than the shadows of the night, like their previous encounters, was absolutely brilliant because it made me feel like Sonny is finally trying to step out of the suffocating darkness of his recent grief and isolation. The way the natural light hit Maurice Benard's face in that specific scene completely transformed his usual brooding, guarded demeanor into something so much more vulnerable and open. I genuinely believe that this single scene proves how deeply invested the actor still is in finding new emotional layers for a character he has played for decades. I know there is heavy speculation right now in the fandom about whether Maurice Benard wants to hang up his boots and say goodbye to Port Charles forever to focus on his mental health advocacy and his YouTube series, State of Mind. I feel a deep sense of dread at the thought of losing him because to me, the streets of Port Charles just wouldn't be the same without Sonny. But the way I interpret his current performance, I genuinely think we're missing the point if we assume he is just checking out. I feel a profound sense of awe at Maurice's acting choices right now. Specifically in the scene where Rick Lansing gives Sonny a dire warning about Jenz Sidwell's impending retaliation. The way Maurice physically slumped his shoulders and let a flash of sheer exhaustion cross his eyes before masking it with mob boss bravado made me feel like he is intentionally weaving his real-life understanding of mental fatigue directly into Sonny's narrative. The way I see it, Maurice isn't just a storyteller sharing his own past experiences on a talk show. He is actively using his platform and his deep empathy to elevate Sonny's current storyline. I feel so moved when I watch Sonny trying to hold his empire together while clearly suffering from profound internal burnout. I think this is the best they've written Sonny's internal psychology in years because they are allowing the character to show the very real, very heavy toll that decades of violence and loss take on a person's mental health. When Justine Turner warns Sonny that he is in way more danger than he thinks, and Sonny tries to reassure her with that tight, unconvincing smile, I feel like my heart is breaking for him. I believe Maurice is giving us a masterclass in portraying a man who is desperately trying to convince himself that he is fine when he is entirely falling apart. And, of course, we cannot talk about Sonny's current emotional state without talking about the massive gaping hole left by Jason Morgan. I know it was recently announced that Steve Burton is taking several long months off from the soap, and I know a lot of people are saying this storyline is dragging without him, but I actually think the slow burn of Jason's absence is exactly what's needed right now. I feel so incredibly validated by the way the writers have handled Steve's break, putting Jason in WSB custody to take the fall for Rocco Falconeri shooting Ross Cullum. I think having Jason locked away off screen creates the absolute perfect narrative vacuum to push the rest of the characters to their absolute breaking points. I feel such a deep, overwhelming sense of empathy for Jason's character when I think about the specific scene where Dante Falconeri is sitting on the chain link fence bench at the ball field with Rocco. When Dante tells his son, "You still seem pretty quiet, I think I know why," and Rocco looks absolutely terrified, I feel the full weight of Jason's sacrifice. I believe Jason, taking the fall for this young boy, is the ultimate testament to his character, and it makes his off-screen presence feel incredibly potent. I think the writers are brilliantly using Steve Burton's real-life vacation to fuel the highest stakes possible for the people left behind in Port Charles, most notably his son Danny Morgan. I feel so completely captivated by the current dynamic between Sonny and Danny. The way I interpret it, Danny's desperation to join the mob is the most compelling teen storyline we've had in years. When Danny goes to Sonny's house and demands to get in on the mob action to take the law into his own hands, I got tears in my eyes. I feel like the writer's choice to have Danny specifically target Jenz Sidwell, believing Sidwell is the reason Jason was taken by the WSB, is a stroke of absolute genius. It makes me feel the generational trauma of this family so acutely. I believe the way Sonny firmly turns Danny down, refusing to let him enter this dark world, is one of the most beautiful protective moments Sonny has had in a long time. I think Sonny is absolutely right to reject Danny here, and here's why their dialogue backed up my take. Sonny knows exactly what the mob life did to Jason. I feel a deep sense of tragic irony when I recall the recent podcast where Steve Burden and Bradford Anderson discussed Jason's traumatic brain injury, noting that the injury made it much easier for Jason to survive the mob because it altered his perception and emotions. I believe Sonny is acutely aware of his history. When Sonny looks at Danny and tells him no, I feel like Sonny is looking at a completely whole, uninjured boy and desperately trying to save him from the emotional deadening that Jason had to endure. I think Maurice Benard played that rejection with such a profound, quiet sorrow that it completely shatters the idea that he is eager for a vacation. He is entirely present in this tragic dynamic. I feel an intense rush of anxiety every time I think about the scene where Danny stomps off, only to hide in the bushes and eavesdrop on Sonny and Rick Lansing. When Rick suggests that Sidwell was pulling the strings to leave Sonny vulnerable without Jason, and the camera pans to Danny's shocked, hardened face in the shadows, I literally gasped out loud. I think this specific directorial choice to frame Danny behind the foliage half in darkness perfectly visually represents his descent into his father's dangerous world. I feel like this is the exact moment Danny loses his innocence, and it makes me so incredibly excited for the dramatic payoff. I believe that Steve Burns' absence is the necessary catalyst for Danny to finally step out of his father's shadow and make his own terrifying mistakes. I know the fandom is complaining that Danny is being reckless, especially with the recent horrific car crash on Route 91 after he took Charlotte Cassidy's car on a joyride. But I actually think his recklessness is perfectly in character for a grieving, angry teenager who feels abandoned. I feel so much tension watching Carly frantically cover up Danny and Charlotte's involvement in that fiery crash. When Carly gets that disturbing phone call and immediately panics, I feel the fierce, terrifying loyalty of this family closing ranks. I think the way Carly is desperately trying to protect Danny from the consequences of his actions mirrors Sonny's attempt to protect Danny from the mob. And I believe these parallel narratives are working together flawlessly to highlight the destructive nature of their lifestyle. I feel a profound sense of dread when I look at the overarching threat of Jenz Sidwell. The way I see it, Sidwell is the most terrifying villain we have had in years because his grief over his son, Marco Rios, makes him completely unpredictable. I was absolutely mesmerized by the scene at the church during Marco's funeral. When Sidwell looks at Sonny and Rick and his voice echoes through the sanctuary saying, "How can you be so naive?" I felt a genuine chill run down my spine. I think the writer's choice to set this confrontation in a church, a place of sanctuary and peace, brilliantly contrasted with the absolute venom and vengeance pouring out of Sidwell. I believe Maurice Benard's reaction in that scene, standing his ground but with a subtle, rigid tension in his jaw, perfectly conveyed that Sonny knows he is dealing with a man who has absolutely nothing left to lose. I feel like the stakes have never been higher for Sonny, which is why I completely reject the speculation that Maurice Benard is just phoning it in right now. I think you only have to look at the scene where Sidwell threatens Ezra Boyle to understand the massive danger Sonny is in. When Sidwell coldly tells Ezra that he is of very little value if he can't keep Laura Collins in line, I felt sick to my stomach. I believe the terrifyingly calm tone Sidwell uses when he makes these threats proves that he's a methodical, ruthless operator. I feel so incredibly anxious for Sonny because he is currently fighting this war without his right-hand man. And I think that vulnerability is exactly what makes the current narrative so gripping. I genuinely think we're missing the point if we don't appreciate the incredible work Justine Turner is doing in this storyline. I feel a surge of absolute delight every time Ada Turner steps into the frame. When she confidently tells someone, "I'll handle Mr. Sidwell," I actually cheered at my screen. I think her confidence is intoxicating, even if I believe she is severely underestimating the danger Sidwell poses. I feel like the writers are setting up a devastating collision course between Justine's legal confidence and Sidwell's lawless vengeance. I think the way Justine warns Sonny about the level of danger he is in while simultaneously falling into bed with him creates this incredibly complex, toxic, and thrilling dynamic that I just cannot get enough of. I know a lot of people are saying that Sonny is too isolated right now, that he needs Jason or his old crew to bounce off of, but I actually think this isolation is exactly what is needed to strip the character down to his core. I feel like we're finally seeing the raw, unfiltered Sonny Corinthos. When Rick Lansing shows up at Alexis Davis's door to warn her that Danny won't let his vendetta go, I feel the walls closing in on Sonny's world. I think the specific dialogue where Rick tells Alexis she needs to monitor Danny closely because Sonny is losing control of the situation is a brilliant way to show how Sonny's usual power structures are crumbling. I believe this crumbling empire is giving Maurice Benard the richest, most emotionally taxing material he has had in a decade. I feel so deeply moved by the way the show is handling the intersection of grief, mental health, and violence right now. I think the way Maurice Benard brings his own advocacy into his performance, showing us a mob boss who is genuinely struggling to maintain his mental equilibrium under the crushing weight of Sidwell's threats and Danny's rebellion is nothing short of revolutionary for daytime television. The way I interpret it, Maurice isn't looking for an escape from Port Charles. He is digging his heels into the darkest, most difficult parts of his character's psyche. I feel a profound sense of gratitude for his dedication every time he shares a scene with Justine or Rick or Danny, because he anchors every single interaction with a heavy unspoken history. I believe that even if Maurice does eventually make an announcement about his future, or decides to take a well-deserved vacation like Steve Burton, the work he is leaving on the screen right now is legendary. I feel so incredibly invested in seeing how Sonny is going to navigate this terrifying maze without Jason to protect his blind spots. I think the writers have perfectly aligned Steve's real-life break with the narrative necessity of taking Jason off the board, forcing Sonny to face Sidwell entirely alone. I feel like every single episode right now is a ticking time bomb, and I am fiercely loyal to the journey these writers are taking us on. Port Charles has never felt more dangerous, more emotionally raw, or more beautifully tragic, and I am absolutely here for every single second of it.